Hello, welcome back to the Everything is Black and White podcast for the final time in 2025. If my calculations are correct, this is 319th episode. There's been plenty to discuss. There'll be plenty more to talk about in 2026. I'm Andrew Musgrove and I'm joined by Mark Withers, and we're going to look back on a victory for Newcastle United on the road down at Burnley. The game ended 3-1 to the Magpies, although for most, the performance will be utterly forgettable. But in the same sentence, when it looked like Newcastle couldn't buy a win on the road, 3 points is all that matters. As always, a special thanks to NordVPN, the only VPN you need on your devices. And with a special discount and exclusive offer, you can keep safe and secure for more than just a couple of quid a month. Hit the link in the podcast description box to take advantage of the offer. Mark, welcome back to the show. Happy New Year's Eve. You well?
I am. Some sort of clarity as to what day it is, which is good, because I've spent the last 3 days not having a clue. Woke up on Saturday morning and realised it was Saturday and that I hadn't filled any of the pages in the Sunday Sun that I had to fill. So quick rush around to get that done, which was good. But yeah, certainly feeling a little bit more positive, but also have quite mixed emotions after last night at Burnley, but we'll stay positive. The win was very much needed, and hopefully sets the tone for what is to follow on the other side of the new year.
I'm really, really glad you didn't utter the words "we are back," because I would have just ended the show there and then.
Well, we are back. So it's been a great show.
So much to talk about, Mark, from last night's game at Turf Moor. Blistering opening 7 minutes from Newcastle United, with Joelinton scoring after just 65 seconds and Yoan Wissa adding to the scoreline in the 7th minute. However, things didn't quite go to plan, with Josh Laurent pulling the goal back after 23 minutes on the clock, and Newcastle really struggled to get back into a good place. Burnley came out at half-time in good spirits and piled the pressure on United, hitting the bar and forcing Nick Pope into a couple of vital saves. Thankfully, Burnley's clinical touch in front of goal evaded them, and Bruno, courtesy of a defensive mishap, added a third for United in injury time. Lots to critique, lots to take away from the game. But Mark, just sum up your initial thoughts.
Well, like I say, the positive is the result, isn't it? Let's be honest. I think we were seeing Newcastle sides even this season crumble under the pressure they were under. I'm not really sure we learnt a lot from the game that we didn't already know. I know, obviously, we'll discuss the team selection in a second, but I haven't really come away from that thinking anything other than if Newcastle were playing one of the better sides in the Premier League, one of the top sides, I should say, with all due respect to Burnley, I think they would have come and stuck. But credit to them for sticking at it. You know, in any such circumstances, they got the result, they ground it out. And I always say this, and I've said it many times on here, it's difficult to win games in the Premier League. It's difficult to win games away from home. So to get the points, they deserve credit for that. But if they are going to continue or start building a run, they're going to have to improve performances as well.
Certainly so. Let's start with the team news and some big decisions made by Eddie Howe. A lot of folk, myself included, wanted Eddie Howe to change his system, although I think we all accepted that he probably wouldn't do. And he didn't. He sent the same setup out with some personal changes. Harvey Barnes, Joelinton and Yoan Wissa coming in for Jacob Murphy, Jacob Ramsey and Nick Valdemade. We'll talk about individual performances, Mark, in a second. But what did you make of the changes?
Well, it was always going to be like for like, really, wasn't it? And I'm never massively convinced by Harvey Barnes on the right. I know he can do that job, and he scored goals from there this season at times, but I'm just never convinced. For him personally, I don't think it's the right move. I don't think he feels comfortable on the right, which is quite strange to say for a player that is, you know, predominantly right-footed. And the other changes, it was nice to see Yoan Wissa get a start. I think they get. And again, I know we'll go on to discuss the game itself, but to get a goal so early on was a big plus, and kind of the type of goal it was as well. As messy as it was a typical striker's goal, was good, but seeing him getting, was it 70, 75 minutes, whatever it was, a real big plus point from the night. And you look at the other changes, I mean, obviously the Pope one as well. How much have we discussed goalkeepers in recent weeks and months? looking at the other one, Joelinton, I think we know what he gives Newcastle. It's that power and presence in midfield. I think it's games like last night that are perfect for Joelinton. It was never going to be a case Newcastle kind of dominating possession for the entire 90 minutes. So you need someone who's going to be a little bit physical, who's going to be a little bit in your face, if you want to call it that. So I kind of got the team selection from Eddie. I just think that right-hand side, it probably shows, that Barnes that's not his position. He is a kind of better on the left, more effective on the left, where he can go both ways and can cut inside and really threaten the goal.
Well, I even forgot to mention Nick Pope in the initial introduction to the team news. No surprise that he came back in at all. I think it says a lot about Aaron Ramsdale. He won't be signing permanently come the summer. And I think it just reaffirms what the majority of us have been saying, that they need to go out and sign a goalkeeper, hopefully in January. If not January, then go and spend big in the summer, because Nick Pope came in, really important save, but still you're not convinced by him at all. You're nervous when he gets the ball to his feet. The ball's going out into touch far too often. But he probably is the better option than Aaron Ramsdale, and that's Aaron Ramsdale's fault for not seizing the opportunity. But clearly, a priority, like I say, in the next couple of windows has to be a top goalkeeper, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we discussed this like last week, didn't we? Where we said that I don't think it'll be a priority for January, because I think they'll just see it through until the end of the season. That said, I do wonder, and there's a little bit of talk about deals that they were maybe targeting next summer. If they were able to do them in January and bring them forward, that could happen. You wonder if that may be one. I suspect not at the moment. But I can see a big shuffle of goalkeepers next summer. Obviously Vakadimos is going to come back from his loan, you would expect, so that he's going to be back in the mix. And the Ramsdale decision, I think, is edging towards a no permanent deal. And I think Pope heads into the last 12 months of his contract, because they obviously extended it and took up an option. So there are some big calls to make. I think in terms of last night, again, and I mentioned earlier, we didn't see anything we didn't know from Newcastle. That kind of summed up by Nick Pope. We know he's a good shot stopper. We know that he will make big saves at key moments. But we also kind of accept that he's just not very good with the ball at his feet, or he's not as good as Aaron Ramsdale with the ball at his feet. So you kind of didn't really learn anything from Pope last night. But it's a really interesting one, because I always put myself in the kind of how a defender would feel playing in front of both of them. And I think with Ramsdale, you are probably comfortable when he has the ball at his feet that he's going to make the right decisions and execute the right passes. With Pope, he's going to make big saves, but you don't know what he's going to do when the ball's at his feet. So it's quite an interesting one to think who gives the defence more confidence. I'd probably say, because he is a goalkeeper, and first and foremost, he's there to keep the ball out the net, it would be Pope. And I think he's just a little bit better at coming off his line and dominating and kind of taking crosses and such like. So I think Ramsdale's had his chance. He's done all right with a couple of shaky moments in there, but I think there's probably enough to judge that Pope is more than likely going to be number one between now and the end of the season.
Yeah. Going into the game then, Mark, it was a must-win, given the criticism that Eddie Howe and his players had faced coming into this game. And it felt like it was a Newcastle United side with a point to prove from the very off. They came out of the traps really ferocious, really fast, got that early goal. Did you get that sense that this was Newcastle United on a bit of a mission in them opening 7 or 8 minutes?
It felt that way, didn't it? As soon as kickoff came, they looked as if they were at it. The early goal, by the way, really, really good goal, really well worked. I think Gordon, we've given him a bit of stick in recent weeks, but it's a wonderful cross in, and a really kind of underrated finish from Joelinton. I don't feel as if, in terms of the commentators and such like, they haven't really discussed it enough, because getting in front of his man, or getting to the ball first before his man, was a challenge. To then hook it beyond Dubravka with very minimal space for error, it's a brilliant finish, and I'm not trying to overplay it there. I don't think it was. To me, it's a sort of chance that you just don't expect a Joelinton to take, with all due respect to him. But it's such a lovely finish. It's just a perfect start, and then to get the second goal so quickly. and feel like this game could be over within the next sort of 10 minutes if Newcastle go and get a third. There's probably not a lot to say about the second goal, is there? Because it was just one of the scrappiest goals I've seen. I will say, I can't remember who the Burnley defender was that Bruno looked to have pushed. I think if he's a bit stronger there, the goal doesn't happen, but he seems too keen to go to ground and try and win a free kick. So, and then Wissa, as I said, it's probably the sort of goal Newcastle don't score with Nick Voltemada in the side, because Wissa's there sniffing out the chances in around the 6-yard box and did it at the second attempt. So, yeah, as you said, brilliant start, really intense, really high energy, clinical, taking the chances that came their way. But then, for some unknown reason, seemed to settle back into this routine of and pattern of play that we've seen too often in away games of let's almost look at just defending what we've got here.
Yeah, highly frustrating, and we'll get onto that in a moment. But I just want to talk about the return of Joelinton. You've mentioned a wonderful finish and a bit more of an advanced position, but he wanted the ball, he wanted to drive forward, but he was also there throughout the game as a physical presence, chasing people down. And look, not really the sort of game on paper that you expect would suit him, because Newcastle United, again, on paper, should have the majority of the ball by maybe 25-30% possession, but they didn't. It was very, very close. I think it was about 2% in it in the end. He looked like the Joelinton of old, though. Now, of course, we do have to caveat that, Mark, by saying it was against a Burnley side in which a midfielder of Joelinton's ability should shine and should look better than the opponents he's playing. But nonetheless, it was a little reminder of what Joelinton can do.
The one thing that pleased me most about the goal, and I went back to watch it a couple of times just to make sure I hadn't kind of pictured it differently in my head. There were 3 or 4 Newcastle players in and around the box at the time. And now, when we talk about Newcastle away from home or at home as well, when they get the ball in wide areas in recent weeks, I feel as if, and again, this is something we've said, there's not enough people committing to getting in the area and making an impact. Whereas in the early stages of that game, you just wonder if the message was to go and take what may be perceived as a risk. I don't think it is a risk, because you're putting the opposition at risk more than anything. And Joelinton was the one that did that a couple of times in the opening stages. But I thought his performance last night was really good. I wasn't really sure about that spell in the second half when they were under pressure, when he effectively played as a second left back. Seemed a bit weird when he was pretty much on top of Lewis Hall for about 10 minutes as Burnley sort of pressured Newcastle. But yeah, it just adds a different dynamic to the midfield. We know Bruno and Tonali can press, but it's not as physical a press as Joelinton can, and I feel as if that sort of can intimidate opposition, which we saw in spells last night. And yeah, I just think maybe going forwards, if Newcastle want to become what we all expect them to become, Joelinton's role within the squad may change from almost undroppable to an extent to where you maybe pick and choose those games where he plays. And particularly at home, when Newcastle need to dominate, you'll need a different style of midfielder in there, which I think, again, I think we've said before, but there is definitely 100% a role for Joelinton moving forwards in what we hope will be Newcastle side that will become regular challengers.
What I enjoyed more than anything really was that he was just a voice on the pitch. You could see he was getting angry at opposition, his teammates, the officials. There was a moment where he was really shouting at Lewis Miley. I'm not really sure what it was over. It was a Newcastle United corner in the second half, but he wasn't happy at something, and it was a corner they were attacking as well. But I just love the fact that we did have someone willing to be heard and wanting to be heard, because that's been missing over the last few weeks with injuries to Dan Burn and Kieran Trippier. So to have Joelinton back as that kind of vocal point is really important. I think that really helped last night, especially when Newcastle United were under the cosh a little bit. I mentioned there, Mark, that on paper it's not really the game that Joelinton should be suited to, and you alluded to it there at the end of your last point that you made, that when Newcastle United are dominating, he's not the man that you need in that midfield. So I asked the question that, did Joelinton look better because Burnley played in a manner that we didn't expect them to, especially in the second half, i.e. they had more of the ball, they were on top of Newcastle United, and that's where Joelinton defensively comes into his own because he enjoys chasing players down. He enjoys rattling them. He enjoys being physical. And is it also a question that, Burnley looked good because Newcastle kind of allowed them to?
I think Burnley, particularly in the second half, when they dominated, let's be honest, for probably 35 minutes of the second half, dominated maybe a little bit of an oversell, but they were the better side by a long way. They created the better chances. I just feel as if, and this might kind of overrule everything we just said about Joelinton, it was because the midfield didn't quite click in the second half. I thought Tonali had a really poor game. But this is form, isn't it? It's not, we're not saying Tonali all of a sudden's a poor midfielder. He's just had a poor game. It does happen. He has had them this season, but at the same time, he's also had some brilliant games this season. Bruno, I thought, had a good game when Newcastle were on top, but I thought against when when Burnley were on the front foot, I'm not going to say he went missing, but there were just moments when I just didn't feel as if he was doing the job Newcastle needed. And that kind of upped the pressure on the back four, because all of a sudden the barrier to the back four wasn't there to an extent, apart from maybe Joelinton, who kind of stuck to it pretty well. Which is why we saw Burnley creating chances. Obviously, Pope's made a couple of good saves. They've hit the bar with the Breuer header. So I just feel as if that was what allowed Burnley to get on top, was that the midfield didn't quite function in wide areas. Newcastle, I didn't think the fullbacks got the support they required from the wingers. After Anthony Gordon set up the first goal, he seemed more interested in going to ground and trying to win free kicks than actually doing the job that he's been asked to do, which was really frustrating. And I really like Anthony Gordon, that, but I just thought last night he got kind of wound up in a little personal battle with Kyle Walker, which you can't really do. But again, and I will say this, we have to give Newcastle credit for coming through it and getting the win, because they haven't been able to do that very often away from home this season. So no matter how it's done, the result is more important than performance. But again, going back to what I said earlier, performance has got to improve to get wins against your stronger sides in the Premier League.
Yeah, certainly so. And the midfield is a real issue. It was getting bypassed time and time again, but it's nothing new. And that's the biggest frustration, that the flaws in Newcastle United's game aren't anything new. They've been there for months, if not towards the end of last season. And whether you're in the stands or whether you're at home watching, it is very much rinse and repeat. There was an effort in the second half, which was thankfully passed into the hands of Nick Pope. It would have been a better shot, and the midfielder should have done better with it. Burnley would have gone back to level scores. And it was the midfield that let this Burnley player run. And he ran for maybe 10, 15, 20 yards before he was able to pick the ball up on the edge of the box and take a shot. And that's happening time and time again, whether it's because Bruno's given too much going forward and the tank is half empty and he can't get back, whether it's just a bit of, I don't know what, like you say, it's just not clicking. But the bigger picture is that it's not been clicking for a long time. And the big question has to be asked of why and what is the solution. Is it a system change? Is it a transfer in January? Is it just maybe just having a strong word and saying, you have to stick to your runners, you have to stick to your men, otherwise we are going to get punished? Because yet again, the amount of space that Newcastle United afforded Burnley, if you do that against Crystal Palace, for example, on Sunday, they will punish you. If you do that against Man City in the Carabao Cup, they will punish you. It's about levels of the opposition. You're facing a Burnley side who are low on luck, who haven't won in 9 games in the Premier League, who haven't won since October at home, who are feeling a little bit sorry for themselves because they're actually playing okay, but they're not taking the chances. If that's a Burnley side on the up, if that's a Burnley side who maybe beat Everton, in the last game, then it could very well be a different scoreline. And it's, again, not necessarily because they're a good side, and this has been the case for many games this season. It's because Newcastle United are their own worst enemy, really, because they're making the same mistakes over and over again. And that's not on Eddie Howe. That's on the players. That's on the leadership on the pitch. They've got to be tighter when they're marking. They've got to be following the men. They've got to be disciplined at set pieces. But that midfield, goodness me, again, I'm saying it for what must be the 100th time in the last 2 weeks. Just sort it out.
So there's kind of two ways of looking at this. If you kind of boil it down to the actual game itself, it's game management. You know, you need someone like a Bruno or a Joe Linton just to say, right, let's just sit in and protect for this spell and get ourselves through it. Because look, in a fantasy world, we'd all say you get out of a spell like that by just going forwards and going forwards and going forwards. But you can't do that in the Premier League because I know. Look, I don't think this is the greatest Premier League season. I think that the table kind of proves it. You know, in terms of Newcastle, with 2 wins over the next sort of week or so, could be back in the top 6, which seems ridiculous when we're sitting here going they haven't really played well this season by and large. But my point being, you have to manage games in certain situations. You have to manage the opposition, and I don't think Newcastle do that very well. They don't allow. Sorry, going back to last night, they didn't allow Burnley to just play in front of them. They allowed Burnley to get in behind them too quickly, and sometimes you just need to say, right, let's just manage this 10-minute spell. Let's just keep them at arm's length for 10 minutes, soak up the pressure, and then we'll go again and re-establish our kind of control on the game, if you can. But I think looking at the bigger picture, which we need to do now with Newcastle, because it's such a key part of the season, and we're going into January and we're looking towards the end of the season, in the summer, and I think it's going to be a massive summer transfer window for Newcastle, which I don't feel as if there's any other type at the moment, but that's kind of the way it is. I think there is a need, and I'm not going to say it to start week in, week out, but there is a need to add a completely defensive-minded midfielder for situations like this. Now, I don't think there are many around that are purely defensive style midfielders that we maybe known, watched growing up. You know, when you looked at going back to Newcastle, your David Batty's and players like that. There aren't many around like that now. Your defence-minded midfielders are your players like your Rodris, who can control the game and kind of do that side as well. But the problem with Newcastle's midfielders, and I would argue every single one of them, by the way, in their minds, I think they see themselves as more progressive and more advanced. I don't think there is someone whose natural kind of inclination is to just sit in front of the back four. Now, if you ask me who that player is, I don't know. I really don't know. You know, I think Newcastle will have watched players like that. Not that I'm trying to suggest that we'll get someone like him, far from it. But you are looking at someone like a Moses Caicedo, that style of player. And there just aren't many around. So I think that is probably the bigger picture answer, is that will need to be resolved at some point in the future.
There's a lot of talk about Ruben Neves. Obviously, he's over in Saudi. He keeps getting linked. I think it's probably more because of the ownership's link there. But would he do a job for just 6 months? Because I feel like it could be a short-term gap. And I'm not for a moment suggesting Newcastle go after someone like Jordan Henderson or Granit Xhaka, but you can see the logic in just for 6 months going out and getting a player who's a little bit older, who's not going to be here long term, maybe doesn't have the legs, but what they do is have that knowledge and that brain and can just sit there, and that will in turn allow Tonali, allow Bruno to flourish even more.
This probably won't be a very popular point, but I won't apologise for it. But a lot of Sunderland's, we'll say success, because it is success where they are in the league. A lot of that has been built around Granit Xhaka's leadership and his intelligence in certain game scenarios. So, yes, I think Newcastle are lacking that sort of player. He is good going forward, Xhaka, but at the same time, I think he's managing Sunderland through those situations really well on the pitch. And I don't feel as if Newcastle have that. Now, that's not me saying I want Newcastle to go and sign Granit Xhaka, by the way, in case, if you want to pin that on social media or whatever. But they do need that style of player, someone who's going to command the midfield in difficult moments. And I think it's easy for players in there, particularly the 3 experienced ones, to get Newcastle through the good moments and add to those good moments and build momentum. But it's that sort of huge leader that's going to just sit in front of the back four and say, right, I'm not moving, I'm going to help us through this. Boss the back four and say, you need to do this, you need to do this, get yourself in this sort of area, stop this happening. And his midfield partners screaming at them, we're not doing this, we're not doing this. Same with the wingers, get them in charge. And I feel as if Newcastle don't have that. And like I say, I'm not sure who that player is. they're probably going to have to spend big if they are going to do that. But at the same time, I also feel there's a need for a kind of number 10 midfielder or someone more creative. So I think, yeah, it's a difficult one, but I certainly do think there could be a need for a little bit of a rejig in midfield at the end of the season. I think Joe Willock may well leave in January. I certainly think if not January, it'll be the end of the season. But there is probably a need for a little bit of a rethink in the midfield as well, just to manage all these different games that they're playing and the styles that they're coming up against, and give Eddie Howe a bit more of an arsenal to go into different games using.
I mean, a lot of people listening and watching us making these points about the midfield would say, well, Tonali did all right in that role last season, and I guess it goes back to the question about his form. He hasn't looked at it. We mentioned in the previous game he was looking more like his old self, but we said it was kind of a bit like Newcastle United. We need to see another performance and another performance after that, and against Burnley that just wasn't it, unfortunately. But let us know in the comments your thoughts on a potential defensive midfielder. Is it something you think Newcastle United need, and if so, have you got any names that you think they could go after? We mentioned Yoan Wissa, Mark, getting that goal after 7 minutes, and just a quick word from me on him. I absolutely love him. He's just a proper striker. He should have had another one, absolute sitter, with a header that you expect him to score with his eyes closed. I think he actually did have his eyes closed, to be fair, when he put it wide. But just being in the right position, making those runs, so important. And there's going to be so much more to come from him. And I actually think the way he's playing in the brief moments we've seen him, he's playing himself into being the number one choice up top.
But I think in an ideal world, if we go back to when he signed, that's what he would have been. And Nick Voldemort's introduction to life in the Premier League would have been more gradual rather than being thrown in. Now, I think when you look at Nick Voldemort's return in terms of goals and such, like, it's a lot better than I thought it would be, because players can take time, and having to adjust to his sort of style of play hasn't been easy. But in terms of Wissa, I mean, was it 2 starts, 2 goals from a combined distance of about 10 yards maximum, which I don't mind, because I think Newcastle need that sort of striker. But I thought the bigger impact that he made last night was just dragging Newcastle 10 yards further forward. And I looked at, there was moments last night when he's really pressing on the edge of, or certainly in Burnley's defensive third, and everyone else is joining them and pushing forwards, which was brilliant. Now, when Newcastle were under pressure, I still felt as if he was doing his job. He was still pressing high, but for some reason, the players behind him weren't joining in. They sort of held back, and almost a little bit of a fear factor, or hesitancy to go and do what they were doing, that got them into this 2-goal lead. And then I thought it was really notable when Nick Voldemort come on, that I'd love to see what his average position was in those 15-20 minutes, because I felt as if Newcastle just dropped in massively, and most of his play was in the middle of the pitch, really, rather than the final third, which again invited pressure. I know it's sort of Newcastle got the third later on, but I think the kind of longer impact or bigger impact of Yoan Wissa was that, just dragging Newcastle forward and giving them, look, I'm at pains to compare him to Alexander Isak, but kind of feels a natural comparison to make. But it looked like he was making the sort of runs that Alexander Isak was making, so Newcastle maybe, certainly going forwards, felt a little bit more comfortable and a bit more familiar with what was happening in front of them.
Again, I enjoyed the fact that he was very vocal. You could see him trying to organise everyone around him. He was pointing people in the right direction, to the right spaces, whether that was when he was pressing. There was also examples when Newcastle were properly camped into their own half, and he was back there chasing and helping, and then still had the legs and energy to actually move forward. That's something you don't really get with Nick Voldemort, and either being there helping out defensively, nor then when he does get the ball, or Newcastle get the ball, him being able to keep up with pace. It's just not his game, but it is Yoan Wissa's game, because he has got a bit of pace about him, and I've really enjoyed what I've seen from him so far. And you can look at the full time scenes as well, and when Newcastle United scored, Bruno scored that 3rd goal. Yoan Wissa basically jumped on Eddie Howe. They've got a really good relationship, haven't they, by the looks of it, and that's going to be an asset going forward as well. But once Wissa got that goal, Newcastle United, as you mentioned, Mark, went into their shell, as they've done far too often. And Eddie Howe described it as making it difficult for ourselves, and it really, really, really was. I mean, the end of the first half was hard to watch, but then the first 35 minutes of the second half was even harder. I mean, I was willing the full-time whistle to come and moan about the hour mark, because I couldn't watch anymore, because it just felt like Burnley were going to get a deserved equaliser. Again, what is the reason for it? Is it, I mean, look, it can't be an instruction. There's no way Eddie Howe says, get a second goal, or even just get a first goal and then just sit back. It must be a mentality issue within the group of players where they just don't feel confidence that they can go and add to the tally. I mean, look, if we had the answer, we wouldn't be sitting here. But again, it was there to see for all that there's something stopping them being comfortable. You don't have to go out and get a third, do you, Mark? But what you do have to do is trying to control the ball. And you could just see as time went on, Burnley getting more and more confident, Newcastle getting more and more nervous, and it was a real tough watch.
Well, I don't think you can class it as confidence, because, and I try to think about this, but when you 2-0 up inside 7 minutes, there can't be many more bigger confidence boosts than that. You're 2-0 away from home in a relegation threatened side. Surely your natural inclination then should be to go and, can we just go and destroy them, basically, and be ruthless and go and get a third? But for some reason,
is it confidence within the camp that they can that they can't see out, a lack of confidence that they can't see out a game, even though they're 2-0? Like, for example, had it been 0-0 at half time, yes, part of me would have been like, oh my goodness me, they're going to come out here and Burnley, as they were, going to be on top and probably grab a goal. But had they scored 2 goals later on in the game, say by the hour mark, and then they'd gone 2-0 up, then I would have been much more confident that Newcastle United probably will go and at a third, and we'll just see the game out comfortably. I do think there is a lack of confidence when it comes to them scoring early. Like, I don't know about you, but as soon as Joelinton gets that goal, I'm not automatically thinking, oh, this is going to be a comfortable night. I'm thinking there's a long time to go here. There's 89 minutes to go.
Yeah, just, I mean, to go to my mind then, it was a case of the first one, I was like, great start, but what comes next? But then when Wissa scores so soon after, you then go, right, let's go on and really kick on and go and really take control of the game. And I'm just not sure why they felt they couldn't do that. Maybe part of it was, I think Burnley made a little tactical tweak, didn't they, where they sort of looked as if, for a spell at least, they went 3 at the back with Walker as like a right-sided centre-back, I think. Maybe Newcastle just didn't react to that. Maybe it allowed Burnley to get a bit more control. But there was no doubt Newcastle lost composure and stopped doing kind of what they were doing well in the opening stages. Now, yes, I think part of that could be a slight lack of confidence, more so in away games. I don't think there's been that's necessarily in home games, but certainly away from home. I just wonder if there are scars of the away record this season, and you kind of hope the end result last night has maybe just improved things in that sense, even though we're sitting here saying for large parts of the game they didn't play well. It is a results-based, business, sorry. So you hope that they will take confidence from that and take some sort of belief that they can go on away games. And they've got some really tough away games coming up, by the way, in what is granted, in January that is full of home games, but the away games they do have are really tricky ones, and that goes into February as well. So they are going to have to pick up good points at home to kind of take a little bit of the pressure away from away games, and they can just go and attack those away games without hopefully thinking about it too much. But it's a real issue, I think, and it goes back to, and I keep saying it, I know, and I apologise for that, but it keeps going back to game management, where they just don't manage games well, particularly away from home. And I think we saw that at Old Trafford. We spoke about it in the show after the Boxing Day game. They didn't manage last night well for large spells. And I think that's, again, goes back to, you just need your leaders to stand up a little bit more, and your more experienced players to stand up a little bit more in big moments in the game.
Yeah, certainly so. A big thanks to our sponsors, fpro.com, the training mat that will enhance your skills as a footballer, improving your control and your focus. The mat fits into most spaces in the house except Mark's very small kitchen and can be even used outside. It's connected to an app with drills built by UEFA coaches, and we have up to 60% off at fpro.com/EIBW20. Mark, Nick Pope has two saves to make at the bar to Burnley. And if we're honest, Burnley waste some really good opportunities to either get the ball in the box or to get a shot off target to put the ball into the stands. A good side will make more of those spaces and those opportunities. And I don't know about you, Mark, but I felt at times if you dropped into that game on the hour mark from another planet, from what you were watching, you would say Burnley have the better squad. Burnley are further up in the league. In those 25 minutes, in that half an hour, Burnley were on top of that game, were on top of Newcastle United. And it's just really, really frustrating to say that, because we should be sitting here and we are celebrating a 3-1 victory. Of course we are. The main thing was Newcastle United winning that game. That was the most important thing above anything else. But I think those 25 minutes, that half an hour, can be quite damaging because everyone is talking about that rather than the result, really. And I think that can be an issue going forward.
Yeah, I think, again, it boils back to the whole thing of if they're going to beat better sides, they're going to have to play better than they did against a side that will certainly be in the relegation mix come the end of the season and may well go down. I think they probably will. What I will say is, and I've seen a bit of Burnley this season on TV, they do look awkward to play against. I think Parker's actually put together a decent squad there. Whether it's good enough to keep them in the league, I'm not sure. But I think there is a good squad in there. And I remember watching them against Liverpool kind of early on, and they were really unlucky not to get something from that game. And, we can go into the circumstances surrounding the penalty and that, but we'll not, because that's not what we're here to talk about. But I do think they are difficult to play against. They do play quite a decent press in certain moments. And they have got quality that maybe Burnley sides of the past that have come up haven't quite had within their possession. So we should give a little bit of credit to Burnley, and I think in that sense, but at the same time, and I was going to say, did we expect Newcastle to go and win at Burnley last night? But I can go back to a text I sent you before the game, which I don't mind saying, where I said I didn't have a lot of confidence or any confidence that Newcastle would get a result just because it was away from home. But it's kind of left more questions than answers, hasn't it? That's the big problem with Newcastle this season. I feel as if even in the good performances, we are left with more questions than answers. So I always go back to Manchester City and the win against Manchester City at home, and you come away from that going, well, where's that been all season? Why haven't they done that more often than not? And last night was another one where, as you've asked me about the midfield, why is that not happening? Why is this not happening? But the goalkeeping changes, it's just constant. It's constant questions that I'm not really sure when the answers are coming, and that's a big concern, I think. Now, I was pleased for Eddie Howe last night because he has taken a bit of stick in recent weeks. And again, there are questions, and I still reiterate this, there are questions that he needs to answer and find the answers in the coming weeks if the end of the season or the second half of the season is going to be what we expect it to be. But you're right, it should be a concern that Newcastle couldn't go even with a 2-goal lead and impose themselves on Burnley and couldn't take control of the game and maintain control of the game. I think Eddie said it where in Premier League games, the opposition are always going to have spells. That's just the way the game works. No one really, really controls a game for 90 minutes. But again, and I will come back, and I'm really, really sorry because I will say it again, it's managing those situations. And Newcastle didn't manage it very well at all last night. And that's been a bit of a feature in the season. When they have been under pressure, they just aren't managing the game well.
Well, Eddie Howe said it full time because he was asked whether he felt the side were under pressure. And he said, under pressure without ... Nick has had to make a couple of saves, but I felt pretty comfortable throughout that second half without thinking we were playing our very best football. What do you make of those comments?
I find it hard to believe. I don't know if that's just a bit of a front, but I don't think anyone connected with Newcastle United, whether coach, manager, player, fan, whatever, would have sat there and felt comfortable throughout that second half, because I got 3 or 4 texts from friends and family saying it's a matter of time. It's a matter of time before they get one. Now, yes, Pope made, I would say, 3 good saves. Burnley also missed some really good chances where Pope wasn't made to make a save. There was the Breuer header that hit the bar. They had a couple of other chances as well. I didn't feel comfortable at all during that spell. So I don't know if it's Eddie trying to sort of, I don't know, put on a bit of a front, but I didn't feel comfortable at all. Now, again, what I will say is we need to give Newcastle, no matter how they did it, some praise for coming through that and for getting the win. But they just allowed Burnley to come onto them too easy, far too easy.
If you weather the storm, though, and you've put yourself in the position that you were 2 goals up, you're winning 2-1, by the time that storm does eventually pass, then you're always in a position to get a third if you manage to come through the dark and doomy clouds. And that's what Newcastle United did. And you've got to praise them for putting themselves in that position. And Eddie Howe talked about resolve and steel, and that was there on show. It wasn't pretty, and yes, it was more down to the fact that Burnley couldn't finish their dinner, let alone a Premier League goal. But nonetheless, Newcastle put themselves in a position that if they could get through some rough seas, then they were always likely to come away with 3 points.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, isn't it? They did show some steel that they haven't in away games. You know, we can go back to it. I know that we don't like to, but we can go back to Sunderland, and if they'd shown a little bit of the steel that they did last night at Sunderland, maybe they may have got, probably not because the performance was that poor, but they may well have got something. But I just thought there was a little degree of that and sort of just sticking at it and not sort of giving in. Look, the third goal was fortunate in terms of how it came about. It's a good finish from Bruno, even though it's, you know, you'd expect any Premier League player worth a salt to hit the target and an open net from where he did it. But I think the big thing I got with the third goal when the third goal went in, wasn't necessarily a celebration. It was just relief. It was complete and utter relief, and a little bit of a feeling that maybe Newcastle had got away with one to a degree. I think Scott Parker, and I didn't hear his post-match, but I dare say he would have felt that they deserved a point. I think he would have some merit in that. But you don't always get what you deserve in football, and we've seen Newcastle more times than we probably care to remember come away from games thinking they should have got a point or they should have got 3 points there. So they deserve credit for sticking to the task. They deserve credit for getting the win, and they deserve credit for coming through a game that, having watched Newcastle for as long as I have, a game that they normally come unstuck in at times. So, yeah, there has to be some praise, and we can't get sort of too down in negativity, I don't think. But at the same time, we have to be realistic and say that it has to be better.
It was a great finish by Bruno, as you mentioned. He looked angry all evening until that ball hit the back of the net. And you're right, it was a sense of relief more than anything. And look, I don't want anyone saying that Newcastle United are back or celebrating this game and this win for anything more than it is. The reality being that it was an average, poor Burnley side that hadn't won in the last 9 games. Newcastle United should be beating Burnley regardless of how bad they've been on the road themselves. It could be the springboard. It has to be the springboard to a better 2026. That is the bottom line. And I am a little bit torn, Mark, to be quite honest with you, because the win, as I said, is the most important thing. It was absolutely vital. Newcastle United got that. The table, Newcastle up to 10th, 6 points off 5th. It looks so much healthier. This is how close the league table is. But the drop-off after going 2 up and then the even bigger drop-off coming out after the interval, it is concerning, and more so because it's not the first time we've seen this season. But it is about getting the balance, isn't it? A first blistering, superb 7 minutes, seeing out the game, brilliant. A win on the road, super. But now it's about Newcastle United taking all those positives and turning it into something constant. And I think what I take away from it is it's much easier for Eddie Howe to solve those issues, whether it be mentality, whether it be the space behind the midfield in front of the defence, it's much easier for Eddie Howe to solve those issues on the back of a win than it is on the back of a defeat.
It is, but I also know managers who would say the opposite, that sometimes you take more from a defeat than you do from a win, in a weird sort of way. There are managers that aren't losing many games at the moment, I will say that. But yeah, I think look, going forwards, we've got two home games on the bounce in terms of the league. Against opposition, you would kind of hope Newcastle would take at very least 4 points, but in an ideal world 6 from. So they have to take the positives from what they did against Burnley, work on what things they need to work on, which is kind of what they've needed to work on all season. You know, the kind of being more incisive and creative in the attack and third, and that sort of organisation and togetherness in the midfield. And I didn't actually think the defence was that bad last night, I've got to be honest. I thought what they did pretty well. And when they did come under pressure, it was mainly because the players in front of them weren't doing their jobs. But I thought, look, we spoke about him last week, didn't we? Lewis Hall, I thought, was exceptional again. I thought he had a great game, and Lewis Miley was really solid as well. Once again, and the centre-back partnership showed why, at the moment, they are the first choice. And it's not, well, it is because they're the last man standing. But even when players come back, I think it would do well to crowbar Chow and Shaw out of the side. But looking forwards, which Newcastle have to do, they have to move on from what's been a bit of a tough Christmas and a kind of Christmas of up and downs, and take the positives into the new year, take them into what is a really exciting January that, to me, feels full of hope and potential, because they've got so many home games and so many competitions that come the end of January, they could have a couple of new signings in, the squad could be looking healthier, they'll have players back, because we know, by all accounts, Trippier and Botman and players like that aren't a million miles away from coming back. So all of a sudden, Eddie Howe's not going to look to his bench and see 3 or 4 kids from the academy that aren't really tested. He'll see established players. Looking at results, they could have 1 foot in the Carabao Cup final, as tough as that's going to be. They could be 1 foot or certainly into the playoff round of the Champions League, and they could be sitting in the Premier League top 6. That's complete fantasy, I know that. But January offers Newcastle massive hope and a big opportunity to really lay the foundations to have a really strong and successful second half of the season.
Yeah, and that's the positive outlook that we've got to take into the new year. As gloomy as it has been over the last month and 6 weeks, there's still been some big performances, some big wins, and Newcastle United do have the platform to build on. By the time we get to February, things could be looking rosy for Eddie Howe and Newcastle United, but there's plenty of work to do to get to that destination that we all think and believe Newcastle United can get to. Eddie Howe, as we said, has had that criticism, but he's still the man for Newcastle United. We know what he can do. We know what he does do during the week. He's meticulous. He's got his vision. It is a transitional season for Newcastle United, but the win last night can't get rid of the clear flaws in Newcastle United's approach, the mentality issues, and just the fact that we're still waiting for a consistent run of games. We thought and we hoped it would come after Everton. It didn't do. Hopefully, it will come after this game against Burnley. As you say, January is filled with home games, so things and we'll look a bit more confident going into that month and into that run of games, both in the Cup and in the Premier League. But what a 2025 it has been. Martin, Newcastle United winning their first domestic trophy in 70 years. Eddie Howe being the man to do that where others of great legendary status have failed. And although he has come in for some tough criticism, he's still the man to lead Newcastle United forward, hopefully to another cup victory and more success in the Premier League as well. We're going to do a special look back on 2025 later in January, so do look out for that. But it's been an absolute pleasure to bring you this final episode of the Everything is Black and White podcast for 2025. Let's go into 2026 with our cup half full. Plenty to look forward to. Big win down at Turf Moor, a platform to build on. Hopefully Newcastle United can do it. And for myself and Mark, have a wonderful new year. And we'll see you hopefully celebrating 3 points for Newcastle United against Crystal Palace. Fingers crossed. Have a good one.